In 1684, the Hudson's Bay Company established its first trading facility in Western Canada, at the mouth of the Hayes River on Hudson Bay. And the idea was that Indigenous peoples would be expected to come there to trade for European goods. And many of them would have to travel great distances to do so. Well, by the 1770s, the company began to realize that that really wasn't going to work anymore. They realized they would have to bring their trade goods to the people, to the customers. So in 1793, they established their very first trading facility on the southern prairies, a place that they called Abandoned House. Well, here we are in Abandoned, Manitoba, and we have a house in the background. Is that Abandoned House? Well, no. Abandoned House was located somewhere downstream of here, and it begs the question then, where was Abandoned House? I'm Gordon Goldsborough, head researcher for the Manitoba Historical Society, radio and newspaper columnist, and author of books on the neglected, the overlooked, the hidden places from Manitoba's past. Join me in this series as we explore back roads to places that tell great stories about how things used to be and how we've ended up where we are today. This is Abandoned Manitoba. Good morning, Eileen. Thank you for meeting me.
Good morning, Gordon. Welcome to Daly House Museum. Daly House was built for Thomas Mayne Daly. He was Brandon's first mayor, Manitoba's first federal cabinet minister, and the first judge of the province's juvenile court system. And upstairs we have in archives the Mignacca Research Center, which was named after another mayor of Brandon, Stephen Mignacca.
The Daly House Museum has plenty of archival treasures from Brandon's Victorian and Edwardian periods. But I'm keen to see what they have from much earlier times, the fur trade era, before there was a city of Brandon. You mentioned you have a map, right?
Yes, we have the reprint of the Donald Mackay map that he drew for the Hudson Bay Company in 1793.
Wow, let's have a look. Incredible. You know, you can see, of course, Hudson Bay up here, and there's the mouth of the Hayes River where York Factory was located. And originally, everybody from this whole area would have to go there to do their trading. But say, as you said, in 1793, they headed upstream in the Hayes. They ended up in Lake Winnipeg. They went then down the Red River to the Forks, worked their way down the Assiniboine River, and this is where they stopped, somewhere in this vicinity, what they called the Souris Mouth, because there was this little river that would join with the Assiniboine at a Forks, and that seems to be where all the fur trading companies wanted to start trading with the people of the plains.
Yeah, there was 3 forts there. There was the Assiniboine Fort and the XY Fort, and then the Hudson Bay Fort was there as well.
It was a really, really busy place.
It was like a little city on the prairies.
Exactly.
And he was very...
Eileen shows me some of the other artifacts associated with Abandoned House in her archives. There is one find that's going to be incredibly useful in my search.
And then a short story about the Tyrrell expedition through Manitoba.
I've heard of this. Yeah, well, so in fact, David Stewart, who was a medical doctor, he was based at Dinette at the sanatorium. He was also a really keen Manitoba historian and had done a lot of research about Abandoned House. And, well, yeah, this actually answers a lot of questions I have. This is absolutely incredible information. And I think it will help in refining the location of Abandoned House number 1. We're at a site about 17 miles as the crow flies east of Brandon, about 26 miles by water, near where we think Abandoned House 1 used to be, at least as far as we could determine from that map we saw at Daly House. I've got approximate coordinates, I've plugged them into my GPS receiver, and we're going to walk to that site to see if we can find the site of Abandoned House 1. I quickly find that the trail has not been maintained for some time. and as I walk on, it becomes more overgrown and harder to navigate. It's becoming apparent that finding Brandon House might not be as easy as I first thought. Okay, now we got to be off the trail here now. Ah. Oy, oy, oy. Oh, big tree laying on the ground here, Graham. Aye. There's not much of a trail here, though. God. But we are heading in the right direction. Oh, for God's sake. The going is tough, incredibly tough. If Brandon House number 1 is here, it's well hidden. I have no idea. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, here's the trail. Then, finally, the trail opens up and here it is. Brandon House 1. The main thing that amazes me is that for over 2 centuries, this little meadow has remained treeless. You know, there were no trees when they established the fort in the first place, and supposedly that was good reason. They had to build a shelter quickly. They arrived in October, so a place that didn't have trees to be cut down, that's a plus. Jump forward to 1890. Joseph Terrell is here, and he observes there's no trees. David Stewart and his investigations, there's a picture of him, no trees. And here we are, you know, a good 200 years, 200 plus years since the fort was established, still no trees. It's time to explore the site. The wooden structures of the fur trading post are long gone, but I do find some evidence of what was once here. My head is almost level with the ground. You know, so clearly this is not a natural feature. Nothing this small in size but great in depth would exist naturally. It was obviously dug out as a root cellar underneath the building. So there would have been a floor right about where my head is, and then of course there would have been a building above this. And I don't know what building. I don't know that anybody really knows what the configuration of the fort looked like. But undoubtedly it was one of the buildings, and you know, maybe a residence if it had a root cellar underneath to keep your food cool so that it would last longer. The archival images that you see now are taken from a long demolished reconstruction of Brandon House that used to be situated on the north hill of Brandon. It's worth mentioning that there's no evidence that a real fur trading post was ever situated there. So you can see that the river is quite a bit lower than where we are here at the fort site. So people who were coming to trade, for example, would have climbed a small hill up this, probably this little area right through here. They would come up onto this flat plateau, and immediately they would have seen buildings. There would have been a building right over here where there's the depression, another building over beside it, likely buildings over here as well, but we've lost sight of those because they probably didn't have cellars underneath them, and therefore they didn't leave this depression like we see here. But you know, in this little area, there would have been probably maybe a half a dozen buildings serving all the needs of the people who were living here. Brandon House was really a twofold purpose. One was to provide a site for trading. The other was to provide a site for provisioning, not only of the guys working at the fort, but for other workers of the Hudson Bay Company. So they would have brought bison meat from the plains, they would have picked berries that were available locally, and they combined them here to make pemmican. And pemmican was the fuel of the fur trade. It's what fed them because it was very good at lasting for long periods of time without refrigeration. And so it's likely that Brandon House was one of the key places where they could obtain a supply of pemmican. So I found this photo at the Provincial Archives, and it allegedly shows this site in sometime in the 1920s. And the fellow standing in the middle, we think, might be David Stewart, because he was doing investigations around that time, or maybe it was one of his helpers. And what I wonder is, could we recreate this picture today? Could I find the spot where he's standing and we can sort of get a then and now? Let's try. It seems to me that this is where they were standing. That person in that picture, I think they were standing pretty close to right here. By 1811, Brandon House 1 was abandoned. I'm trying to find any remnants of the second and third sites of Brandon House further upstream along the Assiniboine River that were occupied from 1811 to 1828. But any remnants of these early fur trade posts appear to have long since been plowed into the farmland bordering the river. With no chance of exploring these sites, I move on to find the final location of Brandon House. This monument marks the site of Brandon House number 4. And now, notwithstanding the fact that the plaque itself says number 2, because at the time when they put this up in 1928, they thought there were just 2. They missed the 2 in between, but this was the final site of Brandon House. It operated here from 1828 to 1832. So barely 4 years, and it was abandoned. Basically, they started running out of game to supply the fur trade, and that was really the only reason to be here. They weren't making enough money, and therefore they closed Brandon House, and they never reopened it. This was the final site of Brandon House. As I explore the site, I can see a shallow depression that must have been another root cellar from a building at Brandon House 4. But the most interesting discovery are these circular patches of juniper bushes. These plants like disturbed ground, and the perfectly circular patches could indicate where Indigenous people erected their tents when coming here to trade. They may have placed juniper branches on the ground as cover, or the seeds of juniper were fostered in the exposed soil where a tent had stood. Either way, the area is now mottled with juniper patches, showing just how busy this post was in the short time it was here. So, we've found Brandon House. But one could well ask, so what? It's a fur trade post, long gone. Nobody really cares anymore. But the reality is that without Brandon House and the logistics that it provided, the people who came here probably wouldn't have been encouraged to establish another post at the mouth of the Red and Assiniboine rivers, the Red River Settlement. And it, of course, would eventually go on to become the city of Winnipeg, and in turn, the province of Manitoba was formed. So it's been argued by historians, and I tend to agree, that without Brandon House, Manitoba as we know it today would not exist.